Okay, let's see if I can do this any justice at all. I'm going to try to give you some mental pictures here. Mankind has always been a sun worshiper. Since before we were even modern mankind, this has to go back before Cro-Magnon, before Homo erectus. Indeed, if evolution is true in its fact, indeed it goes back to when we weren't even humans. A lot of creatures on the planet react to the daylight and the night in different cycles. Different things have developed to live during the day and live during the night. You'll find eagles have incredible vision for daylight, but they roost at night. Owls roost and they feed at night. Certain rodents have developed the idea they don't like eagles, and so they come out during the night. They have a good nocturnal vision, but in doing so, the owl becomes the predator for them. The wolf for the rabbit. So, different things developed different ways, but in all, the one thing that is static, that constantly happens, is this non-static situation where the sun comes up and we ride through a day where we can easily see everything that's going on, and then at nighttime it somehow becomes a time of mystery. You can't see any of that stuff during the day. The sunlight is so bright that you can't see any of the stuff. So God shines so brightly, or the sun, the bringer of light, God, the sun, shows us, illuminates things. Elu is the name of God. God is always associated with light. This primordial sun god, you can imagine that the sun cooks the water evaporates, and it creates those clouds. Those clouds seem to drift off in different directions, and these cloud people that worship the sun followed the clouds, for they knew that if it didn't rain here and there were clouds going there, maybe imagine how a storm god would come out of this eventually, out of an air god that controlled everything. You get breakings and disseminations of this concept whenever you have something like, I don't know, I always use like Conan and things. So you look at the Conan story and he says Crom is strong on his mountain, and he says, the other guy says, my God is the everlasting sky, he is above your God. So eventually people looking at the daytime and realizing that the sun is the same size as the moon, and the one thing that threw us off for a long time but also gave us our uniqueness was the fact that the sun and the moon are the same size, and you could kind of tell that the moon was fairly close, but you can't look at the sun, so they must be about the same distance away. In fact, it looks like the sun is a little bit farther away than the moon, so it is higher above our planet. You can discern this, it's higher above, and we are an earthly being, but the beings we give divinity to are astral beings, and they are beings that really in all nomenclature are aliens, because they aren't from here. The God of the Bible isn't from here. He creates everything, and just in the sheer definition of it, he would be alien to this planet. But that's kind of a nomenclature thing. Let's look at this a slightly different way. This sun god is the bringer of light, and it grows all the plants, but it also makes the water and the clouds happen. And therefore the sun regulates both of these things. And in fact, the sun regulates the night and day cycle. And a primordial people would see the stars glistening at night when the sun had gone through its far passes of the mountains, as people used to say, around the pillars of the earth, and to come to the underworld, where it's the world but going under. Whether it's flat or if it's round, regardless, it's going around. But now this sun is so bright, it's pretty much like a torch, like in an Indiana Jones thing. Whenever you come into a gleaming treasure trove tomb, and all your light, and the only light, is that torch that you have, and you can see these massive gleamings that are coming from this. And so every little glisten in the sky, they believed, and for good reason, was still coming from that sun. The sun lit up everything, and during the day it lit up the earth, but as it went on the underside, it's still lighting everything else up, right? And so you'd have this idea, I guess, that you could present that the sun illuminates everything, but it's a constant, and it just goes in this perpetual motion. It's something that's been set into motion. When people realize that some of the stars move around, then they realize, well, what's going on there? Well, an ancient tale tells that a man was looking at the stars at night. It's a Middle Eastern tale, looking at the stars at night, and he says, but what is, the cosmos to this guy that's supposedly like an astronomer priest? And the astronomer priest points at a dog that's chasing its own tail and away from the stars, and he says, that is the cosmos, that is the universe. And it doesn't seem to make much sense, really. It starts to go on, but then the tablets broke off or whatever. But what does that mean? Well, it's like a dog chasing its tail. And so we can see this perpetual zodiac going on, and just like we see pictures of bunnies and elephants and things like that in the clouds, you can see the power of God in a cloud as it boils up and then decides to rain, to do these things. And he has power, he has lightning. And this nowadays looked at as being, well, as the religion all became one, they said that's the same thing. Like in Egypt, when it became all under one God situation, he was still trying to say that everything is under the one thing, but the one thing is the sun, and it was the originator. We've all deviated far too far, making up this 12 God pantheon and this esoteric thing that has just gone way too deep. And people didn't like that. They liked the thing that they had come up with that was because it was a progression, and nobody wanted to take a step back in any way. They wanted to keep progressing. You can imagine that whenever you're in 7th grade, you do not recall or want to recall the fact that you were kind of ignorant when you were in 4th grade. You were having fun, you were doing all kinds of things. It's great, but it's okay. But you were kind of ignorant. And it's hard to believe that you tell some kid whenever they're younger and you go, yeah, you were a baby once, just like that. And they, it's just weird to them. You can see it's still weird to them. And I don't know if you still have it inside yourself, but it's weird to you too, that you were a baby at one time, And it almost seems like you became sentient at a point in your age, and your dreams and thoughts from that point become glimpses. I can remember little Christmas moments and things from whenever I was 4 years old, 5 and 6, and a couple of other little moments. And then I start to have more and more as I get older and older off of it. But I've pretty much lost those too. And I almost question whether I remember exactly the way that they even went down in the first place. We've had a few family outings and talked about things and stuff. And they go, that wasn't even here. That's when we were here. And I was like, no, because da-da-da. And they go, no, that happened, we were here. But I have it in my mind that we were here and this happened, and it wasn't that way. Anyhow, that's just a bad deviation. But this sun that controls everything, the ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans were sun worshippers. And they had different gods, and you have things like river gods that show up from these water gods. So this is like Enki, but also they're like local river gods, because it was the god that controlled that river. I guess a good example is Hapi, the god of the Nile, which was really called the river Ar. But Nilus is a Greek name for it. Now, you have Tigris and Euphrates, which are known as the brothers. And one brother killed the other brother, and they unified. And if you look to this day, the Choctaw Ara waterway shows you that they connect and go down at the end, that one takes over. And if one was to be kind of correct about it, you would say that it's really the Euphrates, that the Tigris comes in and mends. And so it's all, it's like the Mississippi, and there's a couple of good rivers leading into it, but it's the Mississippi. And the Delta wouldn't be called that little river running in, because the bigger one is the other one. So I guess about what I'm trying to get at here, and I know I'm just bouncing around concepts here, and hopefully y'all are being able to stay with me. So these people watch these stars at nighttime, and they could tell certain ones moved. And over time, they figured out certain ones moved faster, and certain ones moved slower. And Venus played a peekaboo thing, and she was the mistress of the night and the dawn of the morning. And for a long time in history, and you could see this written in some people's histories, they actually thought it was two separate different stars. So that was quite an odd thing, but then they figured out that it was Venus itself. And if you watch Venus's trajectory, it actually makes a star that looks like what we draw when we're a kid and we draw a star, where you go zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. You kind of make triangles and run them over each other, zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. That's the sign of Venus, but that's also a pentagram, right? Now there's other esoteric things that go along with this, where these stars that move, in fact, that's what planets actually means, is wandering star. So these stars that you see here, one would come across real slow, and occasionally it would stop and back up for a few nights, and then it'd start going again. And they'd wonder what that was, and they couldn't figure out the wobble of the earth, and that we couldn't be the center of everything, that the center of everything had to be somewhere else. And that's maybe the earliest of thoughts. But then all of a sudden there could be nothing but we were centered. We were where everything was created. Everything else is just dots. So we have to be the everything, right? And so we had an earth-centered idea that people got killed over if they figured out that it was the sun that was the center of everything again. Oh no, you're not going to pull that Akhenaten thing again, are you? Well, come to find out, yeah, it is that Akhenaten thing. And that sun makes all these things happen. For it dries up the waters, it grows the plants, it feeds everything. The clouds wouldn't form if it wasn't there. And boom. Also, all the stars in the sky, instead of believing that they are individual suns like our own, but way far away, like the Sumerians had recanted, saying they were like torches in the distance, far, far away. But to believe that they were all glistening stones, like in Indiana Jones, and that God was this moving torch, moving around, and everything was lit, and the glint off of each thing, of the stars or the angels of the sky, were what really caused this. They were the They were the movers and shakers. They were the controllers. In fact, they were the deity things. They were in heaven. They were above. We were below. Right? So in that effect, you have odd things happen. Whenever you have a meteor shower and bad things happen and stuff and catastrophes, you might recant it as being something along the line of 200 of God's angels or a third of God's angels fell to heaven, fell to earth. In fact, when you look and you saw the Milky Way at night, it might be a way for you to explain how there's a thicker band and some thinner areas, that those thinner ones all fell to earth. And that pelting had caused all of this going on, not over a long period of time, but over apparently all at once, or it was remembered in that way. Well, if you remember in the Bible, they talk about sin, and when sin enters the earth, the moon god sinned, and then our sin was a major moon worshiping thing. And at this time, they had a lunar calendar, because they could count how the moon went through its crescents and phases, and how many of those made up a year. It wasn't just how many times the sun came up and down, but it was those moons went through a certain amount of phases, and after it went through a certain amount of those, that's when this river floods, and it keeps doing it the same time of year. And they started naming those things and those times of year. And when it became wintry time, that was a time of death and destruction and fall of mankind, and then it would come back out of that. And they said there was a small wheel and a big wheel, and the small wheel is the annual year that this happens in, and the big wheel is the fact we go through these giant ice ages and things. And it's almost like these sages knew this concept going on. But what controlled everything, and what was in control of everything, was that sun god that slowly comes across the sky every day like clockwork, hint, hint, and brings forth life. And it's what had started life. And the Greeks thought that it had started life. And they recant that when they tell you that things around the equator is where a lot of this came from. Why? Well, because the top and bottom part were dead for a while and came back. But they didn't know that that was just an ice age, and before that there was another age. Or if they did, they referred to it as a time that didn't really matter. They might recant it as being the Titans, but no, the Titan part was whenever people were getting their crap together. I've shown that in a few vids, but they were all people. And so now you start deifying people and putting them in names and areas and things like that. And you try to figure out the most high God, and which one is the most high of those stars that we've been talking about, the planets that move through the sky versus staying static and slowly spinning in that ever-chasing dog's tail. And in doing so, we find the seasons. We find that about this time of year, the buffalo move, and we all do this, and so on, like the Indians were canted when we got there. And you could tell we had become a farming community so much that we had it down to where we almost, to this day, when you're an Indian telling you a tale like that, you're not thinking about it even again on a zodiacal tale idea where when the seasons come, this is when this happens. Many moons ago, and da-da-da, and all these stories they try to tell you in this same esoteric way that would have been kind of like our primordial way, I guess, of saying the same type of thing, not but 5,000-10,000 years ago. And it seems like it goes back much, much farther. As we became sentient to these things, they developed the religion that we ended up having. And we know the beauty of the sky at night and how wondrous it is. It's the coolest thing that we've got on our planet is not on our planet. It's look at that. Because now we realize a lot of those dots may have whole worlds like ours around them, and there's so many of them. And all we can really see is our galaxy and just a good portion of it. And out of the billions of stars in our galaxy and the billions of galaxies that are in our known universe, that there must be intelligent life like this out there. And again, we're back to maybe this alien space god type situation, that somebody had done this like we're talking about long, long before, and all they'd have to do is come down in that angelic manner and perhaps see life in a certain way. Whether you want to give it the idea that they started off vertebrates somehow and knew that it was going to slowly change and they'll come back in a few billion years, or if they threw a bucket of swill in a primordial ocean at a certain time, or they sent out probes that do this exact same type of things, this Genesis concept. Who knows? Who really knows? Well, no one does. But it all could have happened just en natural, and we've tried to come and cope with ideas about where all this comes from. But our original origins were to be certain things. We started taking animal aspects. We were afraid of the night. And so as we conquered the night, we took on that panther aspect. So you can see that in a lot of cultures, and you can see that in old ancient leopard skins that people would wear, is that he was somebody that could dominate the night as well as the day. So he took the fear out of the situation. He kept it safe until morning. That's one of the things that esoterically signified. And as we go to sleep, we go into this death. It's a weird, odd sensation. And I know all the animals do it, and we all do it, but the weird, odd sensation is that we almost die every night whenever we go to sleep. And then we rise again like the sun again every morning, right? And so people that had this ancient sun worship and this death thing, and this idea that no, you're not dead, you're just asleep. And so they would bury people laying on their side in a primordial burial with red ochre all around it, signifying a womb of rebirth, facing him to the east. And so when the sun would go around and come up the next day, rebirth would happen and you would get resurrected in some way. And this idea of resurrection was held on to so hard. What we gave ourselves was Jesus, and the idea that he resurrected and now he's gonna hook. It may be true that we get energy wiped, just like a memory stick you put in your computer, and then you start over with somebody else's whole new program over again and again. And it's almost like that Matrix game people try to make the world into now. And it's possibility, yeah, that we're all in a simulation, but it would be some incredible freaking simulation that we would be in. Instead of thinking on those lines, though, or let's think along those lines, it's an incredible simulation of something that would be exactly like what? Maybe that viewpoint will give us a point to figure out things a little bit more into a little bit more depth. Things with a little bit more, knowledge. And now we're spacemen. We've gotten way past the point of esoteric beliefs in the Bible. I study ancient cultures, and I try to get in the heads of ancient cultures and what they believed in, and how they believed in snake worship. And snakes, man, they get old and dying and gray-eyed and cataracted, and they just shed their skin. And you can see that reflected in Gilgamesh's tales, and you see ancient snakes held in all these things, and you wonder about these tales, and then how we had gotten past that concept that was more of an animalistic nature. And as we left that behind, then all the snakes were chased out of Ireland, that all of this type of stuff, but we still have it today. This dragon world concept, and the dragon that eats its own tail is the dog chasing its own tail. It's the same concept of the primordial sky dragon. It just changed its names a few times. People, got a little esoteric or a little bit unique with it. This flying serpent, this idea, well, that serpent is, again, to be wise as snakes, to be wise as serpents. You can see it still reflected in the Bible, where They tell you a serpent's a bad thing right there at the very first of it, but then they tell you later to be wise as serpents, and you're wondering how it contradicts itself in so many ways, but it doesn't necessarily conflict with itself, as well as it just kind of shows you the reality of the truth of how it all came about if you know how to look at it. This whole idea of a sun god that will return, that he's coming back, and when he does, he will take us all and resurrect all the dead people and bring everything back to order, and so on, of the chaos of the night, the chaos of the dark times. He will be the light bringer, and so on. It is that same concept. Most people realize that Jesus is really a sun god. He's worshipped on December 25th. I've gone through this so many times in my vids, but the Sumerians declimated the world in the 360 degrees. That's a ball, that's a sphere. So they already had that figured out. And they figured out that the sun actually each day falls 1 degree. The reason they gave it that amount is that their math was based on the universe, and so on sixes and 60s. And that's kind of hexadecimal, and kind of what our computers do to this day. Well, what that corresponds to is that the sun, after we go through our longest day of the year, starts to fall 1 degree per day as it goes down, and as it reaches its lowest point. It's December 21st, and this is coming in your winter equinox, right? And the max of winter, and it seems to stay still for 3 days because of Earth's slight canter and wobble, and then it starts to rise again in 3 days. This is why we have Christmas, and everybody says, "Oh, well, that's because we put a pagan thing with a da-da-da." And I'm telling you, it's the same thing. It's just over and over and over again. We've been on this fog for over 2,000 years now, and once we look at ancient cultures and everything that goes on, if you put it together right, you can kind of realize that this is all the same thing. It's all so does that make it in agreement? Well, I guess it does. Does it invalidate it? Well, I guess it does, but does it validate it? Well, yeah, I guess it does. It's the same thing. So it's confusing, and confusing to myself. I mean, do I believe in the Bible? And I go, well, what verse are you talking about? I mean, do I believe the earth is flat and there's a crystal dome over it and there's vents in it and the space is made of water, and if God get mad, he'll let it open and flood the world again? Or that there weren't rainbows before that moment, or off water vapor, and just the way it phrased through? Or what verse are we talking about? Because I can't say that it all has truth and fact into it. And if you've read the Bible, there's people that say if you really want to be an atheist, just read the Bible through with an open mind, and you'll have that. But then again, it all goes back to real valid points. It goes back to valid and seasonal things. I've showed you so many zodiacal things, like where the drawing of a star comes from, where that evil pentagram comes from. It's really just something that has always been an almanac situation. It's what got us here. Oh, we used to be devil worshippers. No, we were devil worshippers. The devil idea is a newer thing. Oh, well, there's always a yin and yang. There's always a good and a bad. There's always this. Yeah, we already had that. So what's God's counterpart? Well, it was the moon. That moon is sin. See, there was moon worshippers, or people that saw them from outside would consider them that, as opposed to sun worshippers. And people that spent a lot of time in priests at night time trying to be astrologers and things would say that they were wasting their days away, and that they should be. So you can see how that might change everything in a concept too. But the sun is a brighter light, but in your Bible it tells you the sun is a brighter light and the moon is a lesser light. We know that's not true. So there's another problem with the Bible too. But then there's a concept too. There was God that was a brighter light, and then he had his brightest angel of these starry celestial objects that we see twinkling in the sky at night, this biggest one, this most prominent, and he fell, he died. This is kind of recanting to Kingu and the ancient stories that they had put, and that's one esoteric viewpoint onto it by the Sumerians, and how he had died and his head turned pale, forever facing Ki, which is the earth. And if you look at it, the man in the moon always faces earth. And that's that story, and it's pale and it's dead, and we look at it and you can tell it's dead and cratered. And so what happened? Well, God had avenged and killed the moon and put it in place, and now it runs the tides for us and does all these things, right? So there's this conquering thing, and God had killed the sea and the so on. Well, so he killed Enki, so he killed this, so he killed that, and whenever you kill a god, you take his powers. And so it all became finally under one, but in reality, it all used to be nature gods, and there was a river god, and there was the god of the forest, right? And there's Humbaba, and there's all these ancient things, and anything that was unknown had something put upon it. And once you conquered that thing, you took its power, and it no longer had fear over you, no longer had power over you. So you have that esoteric running, I guess, there. Anyhow, guys, I know it's just been a bunch of rambling here on this, but I just wanted to explain you like primordial worship, sun gods, and how this had all come about, and how the sun really controls everything. I know that as soon as this thing ends, I'm going to remember about 10 things that I was supposed to say during this, and I go, oh man, you know, there's a bunch of things that if I said just in these few words, you would be like, oh wow, you know. So it keeps enveloping around. There are 12 steps to Horus. There are 12 hours in the day, a transposition of one letter. And this is the declinations of the sun going through the sky. And there's 12 at night, too, after sunset and the god set. We still use this concept in some of these words, and all this Proto-Indo-European languages somehow work together, and it makes it to where people have a recollection of similar concepts to each other still. You can be like, yeah, well, you kinda, yeah, duh. And then, of course, the major religion that we have, or the three major religions, are running off the same book and the same concept that had come out of this primordial Middle Eastern concept that was all controlled by Proto-Indo-Europeans. And they had expounded to the farthest reaches of the world. And like a snake that has grown too big, eventually that snake grew around, and like that dog chasing his tail, that snake eventually came around and bit its own tail. It took us a while to realize that we were biting our own tail. It envenomated us and caused a problem, but we got over it. And then you can realize coming out of it and mankind getting smarter, and how that actually led to where we are today, and how that ancient esoteric knowledge of all these things illuminated what we thought, illuminated our concepts, that gave us the ideas of a shelled nature, like atoms, which we figured out now, if you think about it, is really a reflection of the solar system. We kind of figured that out, and Saturn is that most high god. It's the most far away god, so Saturn was the original day of worship of all these people, the Canaanites and indeed the Hebrews, and its symbol was a hexagram, and so there you get that Star of David, or the Star of Remphan. And he was the slowest moving, and he took less declination, and it didn't bounce back and forth and have that kickback as much, and it was known as a king star to a lot of people. Well, Saturn is kind of a play on Satan. And so there were a bunch of people that it was an adversary to. It's the yin to the yang of two different people that out of an original concept kind of came up with two separate things. And those two separate things turned into one yin. Yin fought yang, and now we are yin and yang. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe. I hope this helps some in some ways. I'll touch upon this again in other videos, but probably not in such an esoteric or mild manner like this. Peace.